Greetings, one and all. As many of you have noticed, I've been putting up some Maurice Nicoll readings, and there will be more to come over the next few weeks. I've always found Maurice Nicoll, well, a delight to read. But when I first discovered him, back in the late 90s, I found him very difficult to understand and read. And it wasn't until I got a better grasp of what Gurdjieff and Ouspensky were saying that when I went back to Maurice Nicoll's writings, and I think it was in like 2016, 2017, that it all began to make sense to me of what Nicoll was saying. It's like I needed that background from Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. And we have to remember, Maurice Nicoll was a student of Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. He actually started out, he was a student of C.G. Jung, which is, he was part of the psychoanalyst movement. And he was, I think it was Kenneth Walker, though it's never specified, but I think it was Kenneth Walker who took him to his first Ouspensky meeting back in the 1912, 1913, something like that. Might have been later. I can't remember the exact date. But yeah, so he was introduced, because in them days, to go to an Ouspensky meeting, you had to be introduced. And he was friends with Kenneth Walker, who also was, I'm pretty sure, a student of Jung. So Maurice Nicoll stayed with Ouspensky for many years and understood what Ouspensky was saying. He still had questions, as we all do. He still was learning how to put the work into his life, how to implement it into his life. But I think perhaps with the Jung, been under Jung's tutelage for a long time, probably helped him from an intellectual centre. Nicoll was also a Christian from childhood, so I think he already had that religious centre in him, sort of. Maybe, I don't like to use the word religious, sometimes it should be spiritual, maybe, or soulful. So he had the emotional understanding as well. And, in those days, people were a lot fitter than we are now, I think, or lived a more healthy life. So he had, he'd be having a working, moving, physical body. And he was born in 1884 in Scotland. I'd always thought he was an Englishman, but I was reminded the other day that no, he's actually Scottish. And obviously came down to England to do his studies and such like. I've got here just a little, because he was also in World War One. He was a captain in World War One and was in charge of a hospital in Gallipoli. And all his war experiences are described in a book that he wrote called In Mesopotamia, which he published under a pseudonym, Martin Swain, which I thought was quite interesting. And I suppose from doing all his work with Jung, he also wrote a book on dream psychology. So he would have been studying all that kind of thing as well. Now, when he was seeing Ouspensky, I think this was the time when Ouspensky would not mention Gurdjieff. He talked about the work and maybe now and then mentioned, this work's come from Gurdjieff. But to him, he was teaching the work, not Gurdjieff's teaching. So Gurdjieff was never really mentioned, and I think many people thought that Gurdjieff had died. But when Ouspensky died, that's when people discovered that Gurdjieff was still alive. And Maurice Nicoll, with various others, including his wife, I believe, at the time, they all went to Paris to sit at the feet of Gurdjieff and listen to Gurdjieff. And had their meals with Gurdjieff and learned from him. He also went apparently to Fontainebleau, which I believe was before. So I might have I think I'm getting things muddled up now, actually. So excuse me for this. Perhaps he did go to Fontainebleau, because I'm sure there were accounts of it. So he would have met. Fontainebleau was where Gurdjieff had the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. So Nicoll did spend time with Gurdjieff then as well. And Ouspensky believed that Nicoll understood the work so much that he could go off and continue to teach it, which is what he did. He carried on giving groups and things, which is why there's 6 books, the psychological commentaries on Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, which are recordings of Nicoll's letters and Nicoll's lectures, because Nicoll also wrote letters to many of the people that were working in the work, because not everybody could get to meet him or come to the group meetings. And I've got the first 4 books in them commentaries. Number 5 and number 6 are rather hard to get hold of. And as many of you know, I've got on this channel an audio version of his book Living Time, which I think is a fantastic book, one of my favourite books. And I really need to do a recording of his book about the mark, explaining about what sin is. Sin is missing the mark in your spiritual, soulful development. If you miss the mark, that's sinning. The mark being, you know, trying to attain to make your connection with the divine sources. I feel I'm kind of it's difficult to speak about who Maurice Nicoll actually was. It's just better to read his writings, I think. And as I said, I've done more recordings of his various lectures and talks, and I'll be putting them up over the next few weeks, because I think that it's something someone else said to me before about, oh, Gurdjieff repeats everything, Ouspensky repeats everything. Well, we need it repeated so that it goes into us, but maybe said in a different way. And Maurice Nicoll obviously is coming from a different way of putting across the work. And he says here, right, so this is, I wanted to do this quote, this is what I was trying to build up to. He said, just as we are today finding out about all sorts of chemicals, such as the sulfur, penicillin, and streptomycin, so do we have to advance to the study of the poisons of the mind and the emotions, the outlines of which further development were laid down in the Gospels. And then he goes on to say, the intention is to indicate that all teachings, such as that contained in the Gospels, and many teachings, both old and new, in the short period of known history, is about transcending the violence which characterizes mankind's present level of being. It affirms the possibility of a development of another level of being, surmounting violence. So Nicoll's trying to help people, obviously, surmount violence, surmount their lower beings, raise up and make contact with their higher being. You know, Gurdjieff talks about developing all these different bodies, but to do this, we need to understand what our lower being, our lower self is doing to ourselves, and how it's trying to hold us down and keep us in the density of this realm. And I think Nicoll explains things very well, I was going to say very well, top marks. But when you've read Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, it's nice to have, again, another version of how to do the work. You know, maybe the Ouspensky teaching isn't quite ringing in you, or maybe the Gurdjieff teaching, you just find it hard to digest. And Nicoll's given you another plate of how to do this work. He goes on to say, as we cease to invent ourselves, so we cease to invent other people. We begin to feel a common existence which is without passion and simply what is, without further definition. And this is one of the things that I think that's really important about this work, is people losing the passion for life. They're losing the passion for connecting to the divine. I notice many people live in fear, and I think that's because they have lost that connection that helps you have faith, obviously, and having that faith gives you a more positive, a more confirming, a more, I'm struggling for words today. It just helps you with your life and the way you go forwards. And so this is why I recommend in many of my shows, find God, find the God within you, find your spiritual and soulful connection. Many people are going through this life with a hunger and emptiness inside them. You know, I'm talking about the sheep and the masses here. And that's because they don't have a connection to the divine. And in that way, they're trying to fill it with material gains. And obviously their life is still run on a kind of a fearful level, that when you have a faith, that fear, yeah, I wouldn't say it's taken away, because you still have to face that fear, but you deal with it in a totally different way. So this is why I recommend the work. This is why I'm going to be doing a lot more Maurice Nicoll in the next few weeks, just to give everyone another way of looking at the work, because this is what we should be getting on and doing. So thank you very much for watching and listening. Till next time, peace and out. Find God, nothing else matters, said Swami Vivekananda.